Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Newmeyer, one of the programmers here at the Sarasota Film Festival, and political movies, to me, are always some of the most enjoyable. And tonight's closing film, The Congressman, is really terrific. It opens on April 29th, and its writer-director, not coincidentally, is a former congressman himself. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Mrazek. Now, Bob, by just saying you're a congressman, that's just one thing, but there's a lot of things I want to throw in there, of course. You were a congressman from 1983 to 93. You're the author of several crucial bills, including the Amerasian Homecoming Act, which brought 17,000 children of American servicemen in Vietnam back to the U.S. And since we're at a film festival, this is a very important one. You also authored the National Film Preservation Act, which established the National Film Registry in the Library of Congress. So those are very important things, yes. You've also written 5 novels and 3 books of nonfiction, but for directing your first film, you went to, in your head, one of America's most prestigious and esteemed filmmakers, Fred Zinnemann, for a very crucial part of the filmmaking process. What was that for you?
Well, Fred Zinnemann is my favorite film director. His first film was The Search with Montgomery Clift. Clift's first film, then The Men with Marlon Brando, Brando's first film, From Here to Eternity, High Noon, A Man for All Seasons, A Nun's Story, a brilliant record of filmmaking, and my favorite director. And when I was a member of the House, I was on the Congressional Arts Caucus, and because of his work, his body of work, and also working with Mr. Capra on the Why We Fight series, I felt he should get one of our Lifetime Achievement Awards. And I went to the chairman of the Congressional Arts Caucus and I said, I'd like to give Fred Zinnemann one of our achievement awards. And he said, who's Fred Zimmerman? And I said, it's Zinnemann. And he, at one point he said, look, we've been giving out too many of these things. And, why don't you come back, 6 months or whatever. And I said, yeah, you just gave one to Christy Brinkley, Bob. Because he wanted to date her and brought her to the State of the Union. So in any event, Mr. Zinnemann got one of the Achievement Awards, and he came from London, where he lived, and stayed with me for a week. And it was so exciting for me to be able to talk to him about filmmaking as an inspiration to me. And one of the points he raised, and I've since read it from other directors, is that 90% of the job of directing is casting, and casting well. And once you have the right cast, you're in a much stronger position to allow them to do what they do best.
And boy, do you have the right cast here. It stars Treat Williams in the lead role. It also has George Hamilton in it and Elizabeth Marvel. And it has a lot of ideas, a lot of important ideas about politics and how we live today, and a lot of things you wanted to get in there. It's got a lighter tone, but there's important things going on inside the movie, right?
Yeah, it's not a movie that tells you how to think. I like to believe it's a movie that makes you think about some very important issues that we are facing in this country, and particularly with regard to freedom of expression. Getting back to the casting situation, I was blessed in going forward with this project at the age of 68, in having sent another screenplay, to a legendary producer in LA named Fred Roos. And for those of you not familiar with his name, Fred was Francis Ford Coppola's producer on all of his films from Apocalypse Now through Godfather 2, and since then producing all of Sophia's films. And he very much liked another screenplay that I have, and it's still in development. It was a much bigger budget screenplay. I sent him this one, and he said to me, Bob, why don't you think about directing it? And I will get you a good cast. And he did. George Hamilton, who I was hoping would be here tonight, had surgery a week and a half ago and simply can't travel, can't drive, can't exercise. Otherwise, he would have been here. But the first recommendation Fred made was for Treat Williams, after he read the script, to play the role of the congressman. And Treat looked at it and liked it. And when we embarked together on that process of pre-production, it was an astonishing thing to me. He was working on a television series called Chicago Fire. And when he would have a break, he would take a scene at a time and walk out along the lake, study the scene, get into the character. Then he would call me. We would have a conversation about the scene, strengthening the scene. He invariably had good recommendations, either cutting or adding or improving, which I invariably embraced. It made a much stronger screenplay. And when he came for the shoot on this small island off the coast of Maine, he was Charlie Winship, the congressman. And to see his performance, I must say in all fairness, as a first-time co-director, and my co-director, Jared Martin, could not be here. I'm sorry about that. He's also in the hospital. This is an over-the-hill gang that made this film. Fred Roos is 81, I'm 70, Jared's 74. I'm going to leave Treat out of the equation.
Treat's pretty vibrant, I got to tell you. I think we're safe with Treat. Yeah.
Anyway, Treat, in a real way, directed himself. He didn't need any direction. He was Charlie. He got the role. And it was just wonderful to behold.
I often think so many great political movies are obviously about the political process, and they're about legislature or whatever the case may be, or the White House, but they're also about our ideals. They're also about how we see ourselves. And in many ways, the Congressman is about that too, because Treat's character kind of finds himself anew when he goes to an island and rediscovers a sense of himself that may have been buried for a long time, on Capitol Hill, under all the necessary muck of Washington, right?
Yeah, it's easy to get burned out, for sure. I'm an optimist by nature, and I'm always attempting to look forward in my own life. The screenplay and the story is really about the contrast between two cultures. I spent 10 years of my life in Washington, and back then you actually worked with the people in the opposite party. You'd go out to dinner with them. You'd become friends with them. I was a Democrat in a 2-to-1 Republican district on the North Shore of Long Island. I needed the support of Republicans. I worked closely with Tom Ridge on the Amerasian Homecoming Act, and John McCain as well, with John Kasich on budget issues. Today, the Washington culture is very different. It is a very ugly place to work. There is a far greater degree, I think, of money being spread around and corruption. And I was struck by the contrast between that culture, where no one can work together anymore across the aisle, and a place that I found with my family in 1984 on an island off the coast of Maine called Monhegan Island. And Monhegan Island has maybe 60 people on it, year-rounders, and they don't all like one another. But they all pull together. They do what they have to do to get things accomplished, and fighting to save their way of life, because that island was settled by Captain John Smith 400 years ago, and they're fighting to save their grounds, their fishing grounds, and so forth. So I tried to knit the two together in a lighthearted way, not a heavy-handed way, but the journey of the congressman in encountering these two cultures.
I want to ask you about the National Film Preservation Act and how important that is, Bob, and how that came about. Since we're at a film festival, as would be the perfect time to discuss it. What was that experience like, and what was the genesis of it?
Well, I've loved movies all my life, like I'm sure most of you. And I mentioned to you that when Fred Zinnemann came to get that Congressional Achievement Award, that same week, John Huston was dying. And he put out a plea that the treasure of the Sierra Madre and the Maltese falcon not be colorized, that he chose the medium of black and white. He could have made them in color, the same way Fred Zinnemann could have made High Noon in color. But he was trying to replicate the style of Civil War photographs, white hot sky, deep black. And in any event, he was the one who first started talking to me about the fact that films were not only being colorized, great films, Casablanca, but that they were being materially altered in other ways. They were being optically reconfigured. They were being speeded up so that you could squeeze more commercials in between them. And when you think about the timing of a scene like Frederick March coming home in the best years of our lives, and the exquisite nature of how the family slowly finds out that he is there, come back from the war, nobody should be able to screw around with that, in my mind. So at the time, Congress was really wired by the Motion Picture Artists Association, which represented the studios, to not allow any legislation that would be an intrusion into their right to do whatever they wanted with their movies. And I was able to do an end run, because I was a member of the Appropriations Committee at the time, and Sid Yates, who chaired the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, I took a bill to him to create the National Film Registry and a board that would be created and working under the Library of Congress to set aside 25 films of cultural importance every year to be protected from that kind of mutilation. And I asked to enlist the support of people like Jimmy Stewart and Burt Lancaster and so many others who I admired who came to Washington to lobby for the bill. And when we brought it up in the Appropriations Committee, Jimmy Stewart was there cheering us on, and so we put it across. And I think it was an important step in recognizing that film is an art form. And just like Stephen Decatur's home or John Philip Sousa's music, films should be protected, and particularly the ones that transcend our lives, that really show us who we are as Americans. So I'm proud of having put that across.
And I'm so glad you did, absolutely. To wrap up, we've had congressmen who are actors. Are you the first congressman who's directed a feature?
I have no idea.
I think you might be. I believe you are from my research. So that is our accomplishment, that we have seen you speak. Your accomplishment is the congressman. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Mrazek. To play Ted Kennedy, Stanley Kowalski, Mike Ovitz, and to have your first major film role be singing and dancing in the iconic musical Hair takes bravery and talent, and luckily our next guest has both of those things. Ladies and gentlemen, Treat Williams. Welcome, thank you, and congratulations on the congressman.
Oh, thank you. Better congratulate me in about 3 hours, then we'll know. I have a message for you all from George Hamilton. He says he's very disappointed not to be here. He wanted to be here very badly. He's coming in about a week. He's going to take you all to dinner.
That sounds like a good plan.
So he said you pick the restaurant. So.
Treat, I'm wondering how, we were talking about this last night, about how working on stage, having your stage training helped you as you made the transition to film in the late 70s, because that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing that really you can't prepare for in any way, you just have to do it, right?
Yeah, and not only that, but I mean, my first film, I had 3 films before Hair, but each director is very, very different. Sidney Lumet came out of theater and live television, so we rehearsed it like a play for 3 weeks, and we did run-throughs of the movie like a play. So we knew exactly what we were going to do on set. Whereas Milos, who was European in his filmmaking in Hair, would just kind of wait us out. We weren't very good film actors at the time, so he just kind of wore us down until we got more natural. But so there, it's not just the idea of going from theater to film. It's really trying to sort of find a conversation with the director that works for you. And the other thing is, the thing I did learn is that what you just do is when you're on stage, the proscenium is this wide, and when you're on film, you just take that proscenium and you don't have to do anything. If you think it, the camera will see it. So that's kind of something that takes a while for actors to learn to do.
Yeah, because after Hair, we're talking about Prince of the City, which is one of the iconic movies of the 1980s, and one of Sidney Lumet's greatest films. What did you learn from Lumet sitting there?
I have to tell you, I'm very excited because there's a movie about Sidney playing at the Tribeca Film Festival. It premiered at Cannes, it won awards, and I'm going to be on a panel afterwards. I'm very proud of that film and having worked with Sidney.
What did you learn from Sidney on that? Because I would imagine that it was like you mentioned that you guys practiced for about 3 weeks. He had you
Well,
read the
I
whole
learned,
script,
that
right?
Sidney wrote probably the best book on filmmaking I think ever written, called just On Making Movies. It's about this big, and it's like a Bible of how to make a film, and it's not rocket science. But he took a very journeyman approach to it in that he would break down the scenes and he would break down the film, and then we would rehearse the scenes to the point at which we were ready to shoot. And he would say during rehearsals, if we really hit the mark, he would say, "That's a print." And that meant, I love this. This is where I want you to be in your energy when you get to work that day. Let's not screw around. And he also would cross out the pages he finished. He loved getting home in time for dinner. So there wasn't a lot of screwing around on the set.
Well, for that performance, Variety called that performance in Prince of the City outstanding, and it has been called one of the most playful and brazen performances of your career.
Variety's a very, very good magazine.
It was your first starring role. How did you feel kind of going in it? Were you a little nervous, or did you kind of feel, because you were also playing a character based on a real New York police officer?
No, I wasn't nervous. I mean, Sidney, we were so well rehearsed. And Bobby Lucy, who passed away recently, who I loved, who was a very complex guy and really brought down the New York City Police Department. It seems to be happening again right now in New York. But he made a lot of enemies, and he was considered a rat. And he had to live with that the rest of his life. But what he did was very brave. And it was a fascinating story of hubris. I mean, he really thought that he could outwit the government people that he was talking to and protect his partners from being brought down with him. And that didn't happen. And it was one of the biggest scandals in the history of New York City Police Department.
Speaking of great directors, then you worked with Sergio Leone for Once Upon a Time in America.
Lucky me.
Fantastic film, yes. You co-starred with Robert De Niro and James Woods.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about actors of your generation that really brought a new style of film acting to the screen? Because it was so raw and so real. What was it that you guys had?
The generation that started it, really, it was after the great 30s comedies and the great films of the 40s, the Zinnemann acting, those films. It was really Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, and James Dean who really changed film acting. It became much more internal and wonderful. And that really, I kind of set the tone. And then these two Italian guys, Pacino and De Niro, came along and pushed the envelope further. Both great film actors, and we're all trying to catch up with them still.
You used to hang out with Leone at his house. You didn't speak Italian, right? You guys would just kind of have dinner. You kind of listen to him tell stories, and that was in some ways like the master class from Leone, right?
I was always the actor that said to the director, "Can I come over for dinner and sit at the feet of the master?" When I did The Eagle Has Landed with Michael Caine, John Sturges, the great John Sturges, directed Magnificent Seven. He directed The Great Escape, and I just listened to John talk about these people that were gods to me. And I remember one night I said, he directed Spencer Tracy in Bad Day at Black Rock. And I said, so what was he like? And he said, he was very, very quiet and very focused on the work. And then he goes, and Kate Hepburn, what a pain in the ass. He could not shut her up. So you had all this kind of, you saw people outside of their movie persona. And with Sergio, it was the same thing. He'd tell me all about the Clint Eastwood movies, and one time he said, he didn't want Clint to do too much in the Westerns, and he said to me, in the Westerns, Clint have two emotion. One hat on, other hat off.
That's great. Well, it's funny you brought up Marlon Brando a couple of minutes ago because he was obviously the paragon for another acting generation. In 1984, you gave what I think is a terrific performance as Stanley Kowalski, only the second actor to do that role on screen in the production of Streetcar Named Desire. That takes guts, sir.
Yeah,
to be able to do Stanley Kowalski, years, obviously decades after.
So many critics creamed me. How dare you? How dare he do this? And I stopped reading reviews after that, and then I saw part of it recently, and I went, not that bad, pretty good in this.
Very
This is
good,
pretty
yeah.
good. This is okay. It was Beverly D'Angelo, you know,
And Margaret, that's right.
and Randy Quaid, who's since gone mad, I'm told. But yeah, it's a great cast.
I think it's terrific. How did you approach Stanley? What was your approach to that role?
Well, I always go right to the text, and I felt that what was really interesting about this is it had nothing to do with sexual magnetism and all that crap that they talked about that Brando brought to it. But to me, it's a guy post-war who grew up in New Orleans, and he comes home as a guy who's fought for 4 years in the Second World War, and his domain has been invaded by his wife's sister, who he thinks she's better than he is, and makes a mockery of his lifestyle. And at some point, it creates a kind of a rage in him that his little tiny castle that he was going to come home to has been invaded by this person. So that to me was what it was about, and that's what I was working at.
And watching it again, your performance is also, for lack of a better word, you're sort of younger than Brando's. Like you play him a little bit more of a, like he's a little bit more of a kid. He's kind of a little bit closer to being sort of a punkish 20s kind of guy.
25-year-old guy who'd fought in the war, came back, and you know, his social skills were limited. All he'd done was get out of high school and then go fight a war and see horrific things. And he wanted to have his life the way he wanted it when he got back. It's interesting because this was difficult. ABC television did it. And when we was talking during the makeup and wardrobe tests, and I had one of the great makeup artists of all time who'd done movies with some of the greatest stars, but in terms of the what I was wearing in wardrobe, they kept saying, you'll wear this, and he wore this in the movie, and he wore that. And I said, he who? They said, Brando. I said, so? And they said, well, we're doing a remake of the film, aren't we? And I said, no, we're doing a production of this play. It's a play, and we're going to do a new production of it. We're going to rediscover it. But that was kind of the attitude was, we're just going to sort of copy what they did in the movie.
Xerox of it, yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, that's good. When people talk about the 1980s, obviously people talk about it as an action decade. For me, though, I always think about it as really one of the greatest eras of independent film. In some areas, better than the 90s. And when I bring up independent film of the 80s, I always bring up Smooth Talk, which is an extraordinary film. And it's directed by Joyce Chopra. It's from a short story by Joyce Carol Oates. And you and Laura Dern are in it, and it's challenging material. How did you approach that role of Arnold Friend? Because he's threatening, but there's other levels going on there. It's an extraordinary performance in a very edgy movie.
Thanks. That's very kind. It's a seduction. Really, it's just a one-act play. I come into the movie halfway through the film. I don't know if you've seen it, but you can get it, I think, at Amazon. But I come in halfway through, and it's basically a guy who's pretending to be 18, who's in his late 20s, and he's seducing this kid. She's 17 years old or 18. And he uses a kind of humor and danger combined to kind of draw her in. He keeps saying, don't you want to go for a ride? He just wants to take her for a ride. We never know what happens on the ride, which is part of the gift of Joyce Carol Oates. But I thought it was a kind of a playful seduction with a lot of undertones of danger. Especially, there's one sequence that I love that we worked out where she's walking into the house and she says, I want nothing to do with you. And he physically, basically, just keeps stopping her. But he's not really stopping her, but he's playing with her. He's just toying with her. And then she gets inside the house, and through the screen door, he says things to her that he couldn't have said if she were outside with him to draw her back out again. It's a fascinating film. It won Sundance. I'm very proud of that film. Very good.
Did you and Laura Dern work out? I mean, because there's such a delicate dance that the two of you do, and as actors, I would imagine that you really want to make sure every beat was hit. Did you guys work it out very carefully between?
Well, she had just started, so I kind of sometimes said to Joyce, let's just tell her to walk to the house. And then I'll do the rest, because what was fun was surprising her. It's all on her face. What was fun is she didn't know what I was going to do next. And I think that's part of the, if you want to call it, charm of this weird psychopath. But creepy guy.
So. The LA Times called it that you guys were part of a spellbinding duet, which is exactly what I would call it too, and said that you were exactly
another good
right
newspaper, very good paper.
Then speaking about bravery, we were talking. Then you played a couple years later Mike Ovitz in the great film of The Late Shift, which is about the Jay Leno, David Letterman late night wars of the early '90s. How did you go about that? And were you a little bit worried that you'd never work again?
When I finished the film, he called me, Mike Ovitz, and he said, I don't know if I'm allowed to compliment you because you played me, but I have 2 problems with your performance. And I said, okay, well, what are they? He said, well, first, I didn't wear white suits ever. And secondly, you have much better hair than I do. But it was really nice. Betty Thomas directed it, and she was so cool. She said to me, his son is now a well-known director, but she said, I went to the office of Ivan Reitman, and she said, go to Ivan's office on Sunday and you work it out for yourself. Just go figure it out, what you want to do. Because the best scene is where Mike Ovitz pitches to David Letterman becoming his agent. Letterman's leaving his agent, and this is multi-millions of dollars. And the pitch that Ovitz did so overwhelmed David Letterman that he was speechless. So I got to go to Ivan Reitman, a very, very wonderful comedy director, and I had his office for a day, and I just thought, how would I, as Mike Ovitz, get this guy to sign with me, with the new agency? And so that was kind of fun.
It's terrific. And in fact, you were Emmy nominated for that role. Best
I
Actor.
was.
You were.
I was.
And in some ways,
Always a bridesmaid, never a bride. It's me.
It's in many ways the crux of that movie because you've got these 2 powerful personalities going on, but there's Ovitz sort of pulling the strings a little bit in the center, right?
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, exactly. I also, obviously, your long-running Everwood, you just mentioned, Always a Bridesmaid, you were twice nominated for Everwood. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And you got 2
You're smart people, too.
2 consecutive Screen Actors Guild nominations for that. Was it fun to play a character in multi-seasons? It's a charming show. It's about a small town. You have kids. You're a widower. You're able to really expand and really explore a character over the course of those
the
seasons.
first 2 seasons I loved. I'm going to be very, very honest about that show. The first 2 seasons I loved, and it was really hard work because I was in everything. And the reason I was is Greg Berlanti said to me, Treat, I said, Greg, this is killing me. I can't do these days, and trying to learn all the lines. And he said, Treat, this is a company that wants to make a teen show, and if I don't keep you in everything, it's going to turn into a teen show. I felt that the last 2 seasons that it did turn into a teen show, which was fine with me. I got to go fly my airplane and go skiing, and that didn't bother me. I'd had my 15 minutes of fame already, but I have to say, this movie is the closest thing to Everwood in the spirit of Frank Capra, in the spirit of a small town with really interesting people, in the spirit of a lead character who's a grown man, over 50, who has issues in his life that he's trying to resolve over the course of the show. I thought the pilot for that show was as good as any movie I've ever been in. And Greg Berlanti is an extraordinary writer. So it was kind of like he was channeling Capra. It was so full of really good human, combination of drama and comedy. Those first 2 seasons are some of the best work I've ever done, and I'm so proud of it and so glad that people liked it because I thought it was a great little show. Yeah.
Talking about Ovitz just a couple of seconds ago. So there's Ovitz. There's the lead character. There's Robert Lucy from Prince of the City. You have coming up on April 16th on HBO. You'll be playing Ted Kennedy in Confirmation.
Pack the car and have it yet.
That's right. Do you feel like an extra sense of responsibility? I'm sure you must when you're playing a real person, playing somebody from history.
I've always felt that when you take a movie and you have real people, you're playing real people, but you're really playing the character in the script. I don't worry about Ted Kennedy. I'm playing the Ted Kennedy that's written for me in that script. And you're always going to have what's called dramatic license. And you're always going to have for the audience what's called a suspension of disbelief, which means they say, okay, you're Ted Kennedy? I believe you're Ted Kennedy until you show me otherwise. So, and it's an interesting part of Ted Kennedy's life. I'm playing the Ted Kennedy who had said to his nephew, let's go get a drink at 11 o'clock at night when he was living at Mar-a-Lago, and you know the rest. And so he goes out, they come back, they're drunk as hell, and the next morning a woman accuses the nephew of rape. Now you have Kennedy on the committee sitting next to Joe Biden, and when they say who's going to run with this thing, Kennedy says, well, it ain't going to be me. I don't think I'm the right guy to be chatting about sexual harassment. Well, I got this. This trial was just about to take place for the rape case. So Kennedy is interestingly, I talked to a lot of friends, mutual friends, who said that he was a gregarious, fun-loving. He was a great senator, by the way. I thought he was a guy that did bring people together, and Bob would probably attest to that. But he was such an overt, wonderful, fun-loving guy, and I was playing him at a time when he was silenced, and he was, I guess for a better word, sobered up by this event in his life. I actually think that event was kind of a turning point for his kind of crazy, fun, let's go out and party behavior, and he had a good run. But that's what I played. I played the Ted Kennedy at that time in his life in that script.
We should let people know that's about the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings.
Sorry.
Everyone know that's my fault. But also, I think I stepped on your Ted Kennedy imitation just now a couple of minutes ago.
No, I was just doing. It's the bad Boston accent.
Let's hear it.
No. I got to be honest with you. When say, are you doing the accent? I say, I don't hear one. I'm from Connecticut. Our A's are different. I say in one of the speeches, I say after, and Kennedy would have said after. Yeah. So there's some, but his accent was so. His brothers had an accent unto themselves. The Kennedys seemed to have this Boston accent that nobody ever had but the Kennedys. It was extraordinary. Remember those albums that came out, But when you listen to Ted, and I was studying his speeches and his speech patterns, I noticed that there was very little difference.
Like the albums being The First Family, like those comedy albums.
That's right.
That imitated them. Yeah, exactly.
It's my ball, and we'll play my way. It was that kind of.
Bach the Khan, Harvard Yard. Let's talk about the Congressman, which you mentioned, Frank Capra. That very much feels like this role in this film to me. In approaching this role and this film, did you feel like it was sort of a great return to form in that it kind of took an American story and really made it real?
Well, I sort of focused on the character first. I just thought, what a great journey, what a terrific guy to play. He's a bit of a drunk, and he's grouchy and grumpy, and his life's going badly, and then things start to change for him, and he's confronted with a lot of bad news, and the way he handles it, to me, and pulls him out of a place that he's in, and changes him. And I think along the way, there's an enormous amount of humor. I hope everybody enjoys it and allow yourselves to laugh, because I think it's very funny. But ultimately, not unlike Capra, it has elements of pathos and humor and drama. And it does, Bob's right. I think without hitting you over the head with the hammer, it's a hammerless movie, I call it. I call it a little film with a big heart. It does focus on some of these issues where particularly one issue, I think, which is that news stations and where people have cell phones now, you can take footage of something, and it's like Rashomon. You can make it look like somebody was saying something or doing something completely different than they were doing. You can manipulate people's behavior by the way you edit something, and I think that's very dangerous. And I think we handled that in a kind of a humorous and interesting way.
Talk about the search for scandal, because one of the things that affects the Congressman is that he doesn't say the Pledge of Allegiance. He has sort of a belief that his pledge is he doesn't need to do this.
Well, he doesn't say it that day.
At that day, exactly. But that's looked upon as like, oh my, it's literally the sort of that day's news.
It does without a hammer. It touches on the nature of how we all feel. Our patriotism for our country. And some of us my dad was very quiet about his patriotism. I never knew who he voted for. That was his private decision, and he had his vote, and that's what he didn't announce things. And I think some people feel that they need to, which is fine, that need to put American flags on their cars and bumper stickers and walk around, saying I love my country. But I think there are people that don't say it that feel it, and I think it deals with that too.
Yeah, it's got a very sweet romance between your character and Elizabeth Marvel's as well, and it sort of brings up.
She's a great actress. Great actress.
Yeah. We're going to take some questions in just one moment, but I want to just sort of wrap up by saying, is there anything that you're getting from acting now that you didn't get 30 years ago that you kind of found again, or that maybe you discovered? Oh,
well, Jane, who plays my wife, Jane Atkinson, I did Lion in Winter 2 years ago, and I came back to Vermont, kind of just tired of doing these little movies. I talked about it today in interviews. I sort of lost my way a little bit like Charlie, and just was working, and I wasn't very fulfilled. I went back on stage. And what big turning point is I did this one monologue, which you guys eventually I'll put it out on YouTube. But I did a monologue, and it was so funny and brought the house down. And I just went, "What have I been doing? I'm going back to the theater, and I'm going to go back and do the things I want to do that please me, And I think it's kind of what Charlie's going through. So right now, to be honest with you, I've never been happier in my work. I'm on a TV series. It's a lovely family show that's coming up in July called Chesapeake Shores. I've got 2 movies in the can that I just finished, and I'm writing a play about Ulysses Grant, which my son is going to direct. So
With you as Grant,
I've
obviously.
never been happier. I'm just sort of back being a theater rat, and I'm happy. I sang last week at a benefit, an AIDS benefit, and I sang a song from Hair. It was called Backwards Broadway. Broadway stars get up and sing songs that were meant for the other sex to sing. So I got up and sang a song called Frank Mills, meant to be sung by a 15-year-old girl in Hair, and it was fun. You know, it was fun.
Terrific.
Yeah.
How great. Anybody have any questions?
Well, I wasn't on Broadway, but last week I was. That's right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I would say that was the turning point. Going to these 2 plays, I thought, this is really what I love to do. This is what I trained to do, was theater. And I can't tell you how much more meaningful it is to do a comedy where you're all here, rather than being on a set going, gee, I hope they find this funny when they see it. You know, you don't get the response, and it's so wonderful. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's almost like church. You have the writer, and you have the actors, and you have the audience. And so the words and these 2 groups come together when it works. It's the most wonderful experience you can possibly have, from both the audience and the actor's perspective. It's just a great thing, you know. And some theater pieces are never meant to be filmed. They're meant for the theater and work better in the theater. So, I think that was a turning point for me. I garden a lot in Vermont. I'm on my tractor a lot. I fly 2 different airplanes, a twin-engine airplane that I love to practice, and I love to go places in it. And I fly a little 2-seat Piper Cub off a grass strip. I've been a pilot for 40 years, and that has always grounded me from the craziness of Hollywood. I live on a farm in Vermont, and so 16, and which is plenty. Believe me, when I do all my own gardening and all my own lawn mowing, and so I'm the caretaker. In fact, I had one time I was I was mowing the lawn, and a guy pulls up next to me in the car, and he says, "Hey," I said, "How you doing?" He says, "Is there a movie star lives here? Does a movie star live here?" I said, "Yeah, I think he does, but he's never here. We're just never." He says, "Oh, okay," and he drives off. I am apparently distantly related to Robert Treat Paine, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He also, interestingly, I didn't know this, when John Adams was the defense lawyer after the Boston Massacre of the 5 English soldiers, Robert Treat Paine was the prosecutor and lost the case. But they both signed the Declaration. Then the name came down through New England as the Robert Treat family. And then the Andrew family, it split off, and as names are wont to do, become maiden names. And so my grandfather was Treat Andrew, and my uncle, Treat Andrew Jr., was killed at 19 in World War II as a tail gunner. And so 4 years later, I was named Richard Treat Williams, and that's how I got here as Treat. Oh, yeah, Franklin and Marshall College was, first of all, I wasn't a very good student at Kent School where I went, and I got into Franklin. It was the only place I got in. And I was happy to get in anywhere. But once I got there were 3 wonderful professors, all of whom had their PhDs in different aspects of theater. So I ended up having some of the greatest theater training I could have possibly had. And one of the two theaters that's landmarked, Ford's Theater and the Fulton Opera House on the East Coast, that's where I did my training. And we would do 3 plays every summer in repertory, and I would do plays all year round. At school, hardest thing was quitting football. I quit to become an actor, and I missed that. I still miss it. But that was great training, and it was a great college, and still is a great college. Yeah, sure. Yeah, in fact, I'm thinking about doing La Mancha at the Fulton. I'm talking to some people about that. We got to talk. Find me after.
After football, when you went to acting, what was it about acting that attracted you? What was the thought?
I like making people laugh. That's how it started. I was on stage as a kid. I wasn't very funny in the classroom. I don't think it was particularly popular. But something would happen when I'd get on stage. And I remember doing some kind of a take during a silly little play called If Men Reduced as Women Did. And we all had pillows or something. And I poured a Coca-Cola, and the glass foamed over, and I just did like a take, and it got this big laugh that came out of the darkness, and I went, ooh, I like that. That feels good, But I think genuinely I do like to entertain people. I like to make people laugh, and I like it's fun because I consider myself a jack of all trades and master of none. I get to learn what other people do each character I play, I learn something about somebody else's life, and that's really fun. And that's been great for me, because I have a very limited attention span. I wouldn't last in an office.
You're very Ryan funny in Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead, too, by the way. And just talking about comedies. You don't do many. You should do more.
I played a psychopathic killer in that, but he was also kind of funny.
Critical Bill.
And they'd say my wife had it, she'd say, didn't it scare you seeing your husband like that? And she said, no, he's like that at home. No, I don't think any turndowns. There were a couple plays I was sorry I couldn't, because I was raising my kids out in Park City, Utah during Everwood. And after Everwood ended, we stayed for a while, and I didn't want to leave. So there were some things but my children have always been primary in my life. My family comes first. So, but no, I actually think I am the luckiest guy on earth. Look at the parts I've got to play. I got to play the hippie in Hair and Prince of the City, and I've played, psychopaths and Things to Do in Denver, and the King of England, and I'm going to play General Grant, which I'm excited about. So I feel like I've had so much luck. There are things I want to do, and I'm looking forward to doing at this part of my life. But I'm very content with what I've done and very happy.
We have time for just one or two more.
Well, it's interesting you ask that question, because I've been thinking about this lately. Television is in a transitory state right now, as you know. The product is being made by the companies that were selling the product 5-6 years ago. They're now making television. The other thing that I thought about recently is that the screens have gotten so big in the households, television can no longer be talked of as talking heads. The thing I didn't like about television was you always had to have close-ups. You always had to have close-ups because your face was that big. On a film screen, it's 80 feet wide. So the storytelling, you could have things happening in the background that the audience would say, oh, he's doing something in the background there while the scene's playing in front. You couldn't do that on TV back in the day because the box was too small. And so I think that film and television are now converging in a way. Obviously, the kind of television that tells a story on a consistent basis is, and I love that kind of television, is different than making a film for television. But making a film for television now, I think, is really changing, and for the better, I think, because you can actually make the film like a cinematic film and not worry so much that the audience is going to miss something. I think all of the social media is threatening film as we knew it. And I think the one thing that's wonderful about a film is that the lights go out and you're sharing this experience with a large group of strangers. And that's the same in theater. That's the thing I think that I would miss most is, and people don't go out as much. You'll notice that the people going out to movies is dropping. But I think that experience of being in an audience and becoming part of that breathing, living thing called an audience is something that's quite wonderful. And I actually, one of my favorite films of all time is Cinema Paradiso. Isn't that great? And that's such a testament to people sitting out, being in that audience and having that wonderful experience together. And then maybe you're never seeing one another again. So I'll be sorry to see that go. And yes, I do think it's starting to disappear.
We've been very lucky to share this experience with you, ladies and gentlemen. Treat Williams, the movie is The Congressman. Thank you very much. Thanks, Treat.